consideration to earlier so that you can be part of that. Shanley might be joining us as well. All right, so let's begin. I call this meeting on March 12th of the Historical Resources Committee to order. First off, let's do the review of minutes. Everybody take a chance to look at Rhonda's minutes that she
I got a
sent.
new computer and I can't find, oh, here it is.
Oh.
No, that's not it. My
It was,
word processor.
since we didn't have a February meeting, it's really just the January minutes to review,
That's right.
which were flawless as usual. So, yes.
Just one, Meg
Oh,
Buck,
Chris, can you hit your microphone on there?
I turned it on.
No, Chris.
Oh.
Yeah.
Means I have to talk. Or not.
Rhonda, spelling Meg Barclay's last name is Barclay.
B-A-R-C
Lay, Barclay.
Barclay. Okay.
Okay,
Wow.
that's all I saw.
And Pat also caught some italics that shouldn't have been.
Alex?
I'm just joking. You read them closely. Okay. Do we have a motion to
I move that
Approve
we
the minutes?
accept the minutes as read.
in a second? All in
Written.
all in favor? All right, okay.
Oh, I don't vote.
Minutes recorded. All right, so moving to my report. So as you know, there's been a little bit of a membership update. So Anne has needed to step down from full-time membership and she's going to become an alternate. I'm hoping that may not be permanent, but she's just dealing with a lot of personal things that makes it impossible for her to be here in Camden and also to participate. So she tentatively has agreed to continue to supervise the, the project she's been working on for so long that, Jacobs Avenue. And so hopefully in April or May, she will return and reinvigorate that. But we're going to kind of consider that as being on hold until then. I don't think it would be smart to hand that off to somebody else at this point. She's put so much work into it. So I'm really hoping she'll continue that work. So Danny has officially been approved. He's a full-time member now. That might be him there. Hello. Hey. So he will be, he's an official member now. And I am talking to somebody from Michael's recommendation this week who seems like a really good candidate. And I suspect he will also be joining the committee. So we should be back to full membership by our next meeting, hopefully, which is great.
I missed the first part of that conversation.
Yeah, so Anne has had to step down to an alternate membership. She's just unable to attend frequently. So Danny has been approved to join the committee, and there's somebody else who will be submitting an application this week. So I think we'll be back to full membership by our next meeting.
So as I said, I would like to finish my term this year, but if somebody is anxious for my spot already, then I
Well,
would.
I think
change.
Witter took your spot, was what happened.
What was that?
I think Witter,
Their mic's on.
mine's on. Yeah, that'd be great.
Oh, she needs to turn it on.
Oh,
Not that I'm saying it.
yeah, sorry.
I-
Yeah, so
I believe what happened
what's
was
happened?
when
So-
Witter joined the committee,
Yeah,
he took your full-time spot and you were moved to alternate.
uh-huh,
But then Witter resigned his spot, which was then taken by Danny.
uh-huh.
So I think you are right now technically an alternate member.
Oh, you had told me I had to go into the town office to resign my position, and I hadn't done that, so I thought I was still official.
Okay, there's been a I forwarded your email to me that you,
I didn't email you about that. I just assumed that I had to go do that, and I hadn't done it.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have to clarify this.
Or
So
maybe
technically, right now, you're not.
Janice will know.
Yeah.
I'll see.
We'll have to clarify this. All right. The town report is due April 8th, so I'm preparing that right now. But I wanted to poll you guys about anything that you think I might not, there's very obvious things to include in that, but is there anything from the past year that you think is important to report to select board that I might not think to include? There's the obvious accomplishments of the plaques, progress with the ordinance. Anything else that, yeah,
Perhaps I've submitted a grant
The Yacht
to
Club.
Jeremy, so it's really coming from this committee
yeah,
to do some pre-development work to deal with flooding, sea level rise with
Yeah.
the Camden Yacht Club.
I'll definitely include that as well. And the grant is really, I can't believe the speed at which you work. It's amazing. I know it's due the 24th, but, so we'll get to that. All right, anything else?
I just hadn't heard, the Historic Resources Committee is working with Jeremy to apply for a grant for the yacht club?
We'll get to that, but yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So
Yes.
the question of the Elm Street School reuse, I think, I know I didn't go to the planning board meeting when that was being discussed, and I was hoping that somebody from here had gone.
It hasn't been discussed yet. It's on the agenda for the next meeting.
Uh-huh,
Um,
okay.
Can I speak? That's actually, it has gone to public hearing for the planning board, but it has not gone to public hearing for the select board, and we do not have a public hearing date set yet.
Okay, I'd heard that it was on the agenda for the next meeting, but.
It is not.
Okay.
It is not yet. But you can review the planning board meeting on YouTube, on the town YouTube channel.
Hmm?
You can review the planning board meeting
That's
on the
fine.
town YouTube channel
Sure.
for public hearing.
I know a little bit about what came out of that discussion, and Shanley was going to attend today to kind of fill us in. But when we get to that, we'll
Okay,
talk about
good.
that. So we made some minor changes to the website with Janice. I submitted a budget, and it's not really working that way now with the kind of the modifications to, but I still kind of gave a heads up to Audra about expected expenses for the forthcoming year for her to slot into the kind of new way they're approaching committee budgets and costs. If anybody wants to take a look at that, I can pass that around, but got that. And the historic preservation ordinance, I continue to work on that. I've done some informal conversations with various people, just kind of getting some reactions, and some of the reactions I've gotten, as we would expect, is there's enthusiasm for it and also reticence. And I think as we continue to modify that, keeping it as simple and digestible and understandable is going to be an ongoing challenge, and really laying out the benefits. And one of the objections I recently heard, which I had not anticipated or thought of, was some concerns about how does a historic preservation ordinance work with energy concerns and energy efficiency and the demands that architects and designers want to apply to old homes as they're renovated. And that's an interesting question and something I think we're going to have to think about as we move forward.
We have thought about that. We haven't really fleshed it out. But given my house renovation, we've given a lot of thought to it as far as solar, et cetera. So we're not in the dark completely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How we approach that.
The interior has lots of information on that, and they've written about it and included it in their.
Well, I look forward to incorporating everybody's expertise in that as we continue to draft and take notes and feedback. I think that's going to be really important. And I also have wanted to have a sit down with Allison to kind of get a temperature check with her about the best way to kind of involve the select board in the process and kind of make them aware of where we are and kind of, get a temperature check on that. So that's still forthcoming.
It's a great opportunity. We've even got Tom here too. So that's a tough one to speak for the select board
Yeah.
on. It's definitely not something that we've talked about a lot. So, the level of knowledge on a historic preservation ordinance is going to be, very low because it's not something we've talked about. So
I would suggest that the board's going to rely on your expertise for this, and we're going to weigh heavily what you have to say. Just because everybody comes at it from different angles, but this is the committee that's tasked with that. And there's a good chance that what you bring before us regarding historic preservation in relation to energy efficiency and anything modern that we may see or want is going to, you'll have a lot of say in it. Well, you know, what you bring before the board will probably be what the plan that the town moves forward with.
Well, that's a very optimistic note. So,
Certainly the way I see it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Allison, there's another microphone over here, right there.
Oh, sure. I was gonna be quiet and you were listening. but,
So the plan, just so you know, is for us to put a PowerPoint presentation and come to a select board meeting and kind of update you with where we are and our hopes for it and how to kind of position it and all that. So that's forthcoming. So Allison, you're next on the agenda. Is there anything you want to report to us or update us on?
No, I mean, I see that you have the Elm Street School being on the agenda. That's, you know, something that's come to us. And there's debate over the, you know, the degree to which the select board or any committee would have, you know, it's not technically a town-owned property, it's a school-owned property. And your technical purview is to advise the town on town-owned historic properties. Yeah, I think that's kind of the major overlap. And then talking about the budget, obviously that meeting is really disappointing after telling you guys so many times that the opportunity to weigh in on budget priorities was going to be that budget committee meeting on the 25th. I'm sorry about that. But you can still, you know, follow along with the budget committee discussions. And I really would, you know, encourage you to do that. And then either individually or as a group, you know, attend those meetings, or you can write comments as well.
My
So,
understanding is that on the 28th, there is a budget discussion as it relates to committees.
who is that?
I haven't looked at the actual schedule. It's always a surprise. A happy
Yeah, it's a
surprise.
lot to keep up with all
It's
the.
on there, on the budget committee agenda for the
Sure.
28th. So I
If
just wanted
that's
to-
what it says, yes.
Okay, so that would be the replacement then for the,
That's my understanding, yeah.
okay.
Okay, great. Why don't we actually move to, if you guys don't mind, move up the discussion about the amendment to this place, because I know, Danny, you may only have an hour with us today. Is that correct? Okay.
Street School.
I just think, you know, you brought it up. So here's my understanding. I don't know if everybody got a chance to review the language last night. We really got it at the last minute. And I know that's one of the considerations is kind of how fast this is moving. So we really haven't had time as a committee to digest. This is our first chance to really discuss it. But my understanding of where this is it has gone through past the planning board. And as you know, here's our expert. Maybe this would be a great, sorry to just throw you under the fire here, but would you mind kind of giving us an update of where this amendment is in terms of process so that we can kind of get background?
It was a while ago.
The amendment to the zoning amendment in Chestnut Hill.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Was attached.
Yes, hi. This is a zoning amendment that was proposed by the school board. And it's a text amendment. It's not a map amendment. It's actually modifying the language in the code, like to change the wording. And it's specific to the B1 district. And it has gone before the plan board. And I think it got approval at that meeting. It had a public hearing. I think it was last month. I'm not sure exact date. And now it's at the point where I believe there's been a request, which is perfectly appropriate, that have more input on it, especially from the Historic Preservation or Historic Resources Committee, because it ultimately involves property that is in the Chestnut Street Historic District. So I think the direction was for staff to, and for the applicant to get some more input on, especially on that relation to the Historic Resources Committee and in moving forward, because even though it's not a map amendment, it's a text amendment, it would impact property that's in the Chestnut Street Historic District. So it makes sense to.
So my understanding is we're really just in an advisory capacity to kind of give input
Right.
to the select board and planning board.
Can I give a little input
Yeah.
on that as well? So the planning board meeting was February 29th. If you want to watch that, it's on the town YouTube channel. And they did have a public hearing with the planning board February 29th. And what Shenley said is accurate. Allison suggested that it go before the Historic Resources Committee. And I also agreed that that was a good idea. So we've kind of put the brakes on this proposal a little bit as far as advancing it through the town from planning board immediately to select board, because there's a strong input that we need more public comment on this. And it doesn't really have to do with the applicant or the project. It has to do more with the zoning change. But I think what the select board would like input from you on is exactly what Shenley said. You know, the effects on, to me, this is spot zoning, which I don't care for. I understand that there's a reason for it. There's a real need for housing for teachers. I don't think this is the only opportunity the school system would have for housing for teachers. There's all kinds of viable properties around here where apartment buildings could be made that are specifically for the purpose of housing and not maybe repurposing a historic building. But it's no matter what I think or anyone else thinks, it is a viable idea, and it's something that the town and the school department should talk about. But what we would like is just more input, and first and foremost, input from this committee, because you all have some type of expertise and interest in historic resources as it relates to the town.
And I see, Maria, that you've joined this Zoom, so it'll be interesting to get your input. If you could, just one moment, I mean, you've all read the document, but it's an addition of 2 different units. 6 would go to 8 on the first floor is the essential result of the modification. The question I had, you said, spot.
Hold on, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I actually haven't seen any documents about this ever. Is there something that,
Came in last night, and
From,
I forwarded it to you on our.
okay, I didn't realize that. I just thought that was an agenda thing. I didn't realize there's a whole.
Yeah, it's with
Have you
the
seen all
agenda.
this?
The only thing I've seen is an application, that's all. Is there any other background in there besides the application?
No, just the
Okay.
application.
Does it have a site, does it have a concept design or?
It has a survey.
No.
Oh, okay,
Just a
so it's not
property
like-
map. but yeah.
No, yeah, it's not like an application. It's like, this is a text amendment that is just changing the zoning. And there are other parts to projects when they come before different committees, but some projects require site plan review. And like, say this project didn't require a zoning change, a text change, it would automatically go through a site plan review process, and it would be triggered like because of the square footage and everything. And it would also go through historic resources, just so you know, review as well for whatever the construction, when they apply for building permits.
I have a copy of it if you'd like. Here, I'll send
Because
it.
of the modification of the historic building or?
It just triggers, yes, it will trigger site plan review just for the square footage. I think it's
That's what I
10,000.
understand, but I'm not aware that it would normally go to the Historic Resources Committee unless it's part of the demolition or the major renovation.
It's a town-owned property.
no, it
It's
isn't.
not a
It's
town-owned
school.
property.
That's a question, that's a question.
Well, I think that,
I mean, the Historic Resources Committee didn't review the MET stuff. I think
Mhm.
technically speaking, there is no rule or ordinance that forces Historic Resources Committee review. I think it's happening because of feeling like in order to be comfortable making a zoning change, which is the town's purview and not the school board's purview to suggest that to voters, this is seen as part of the process that would, like the public input process that would make us feel comfortable with sending the zoning proposal to voters. but not anything from an ordinance perspective that is forced.
It does have some design review criteria, like if it alters a couple of facades, like historic or architectural details are involved, it would involve them to review it as well. Just to let you know. And,
No, that's helpful, but what part of the ordinance is that?
oh, I'm sorry, it's in the site plan review in the zoning ordinance. It's under Article 12.
Site plan review requires that the Historic Resources Committee review.
If
just
if there's proposals under section A1 and 2 above, which is the plan,
Because it's town-owned or just because it's?
just in general, because, yeah, because it's in there, it says proposals include 2 or more of the following types of exterior renovations to a non-residential or multifamily building within a 2-year period in the B1 or BTH zoning districts. But that's all it says. So it would get their input. But that's like,
Fascinating. I don't
I know,
think that's ever happened.
it's in the very end. Yeah, it probably hasn't.
Is that just maybe you're reading the ordinance more carefully than?
Oh,
some
no,
staff
maybe,
have read the ordinance?
maybe nothing's come before staff, in
They're
this.
here because of the
Hmm?
Yeah,
It's
but
not,
this,
she's
I
saying
mean,
that's
this
not,
committee was set up because to review,
I wasn't aware that there was anything in our ordinance that, aside from the most recent demolition delay ordinance,
Right.
I wasn't aware that there's anything in the ordinance that forces Historic Resources Committee review.
I think because it's in a revision within the Chestnut Historical District is,
no, it's not in the Chestnut Historic
Right.
District, and it's not a national registered historic building.
Right.
I think it was recognized by the Camden Landmark as a Camden landmark, but, Chris, it's owned by the school district. It's not owned by the town. It's not in a historic district. It is a historic building, 1859. And I couldn't see anything in the request for ordinance that said anything about us reviewing it. I love the fact that we get to have input.
Yeah.
But I don't see where it says that we have that.
well, that was my question
It's
too. but
just,
it-
it's a change to the zoning text to allow multifamily dwelling units to be constructed at street level. So right now,
Right.
in the code, they don't permit that. And if you're in the B1 and the Chestnut Street Historic District. So you're allowed to have single family and you're allowed to have a duplex at street level, but not multifamily. And I'm not sure why that code was done in the beginning. Maybe they wanted to change the character, or maybe they were worried it would impact the character of the district. I'm not sure why that was in there,
so
but it's,
one point of clarification.
benefit
Shanley,
one person.
yes,
I had asked you, I didn't think that this fell in the Chestnut Historic District, but you said it
I thought
does.
it did.
Done the
Let
overlay
me do a
map.
clarification. So Pat, we had looked at the Great Fire
Fire district.
Historic.
Oh.
It is in the
Oh, it's in the
Chestnut
Chestnut,
Street
It's in the
but
Historic
not in the
District.
fire district.
Right,
Okay,
right.
I'm
See that if you want.
corrected there. That's right.
Yeah, so it falls, I guess, with both
But
within
even
the
if it
business.
Is,
Unless it's a demolition.
right. And I'm not arguing that they shouldn't have that. I'm just trying to understand whether in my mind, we're asking for this as a part of the public input process. It's going to help the select board, but not necessarily because any part of it is going to be forced. But if you're saying that when it does get to the planning board, it will necessitate their review, no matter what the select board decides, that's
I would,
interesting.
I can't speak for the plan board. I mean, it doesn't say specifically that you shall have the HRC review this, but it does have design standards that apply to buildings and historic features or specific architectural details shall preserve those features and details to the maximum extent feasible. So that's under design considerations in our code, just as it is. But,
That's fascinating. I've
yeah.
actually never heard that brought up before.
and I imagine the plan board might want their input, but I mean, that's something that this committee could recommend if it goes,
I mean, they would be a logical
yeah.
group to weigh in
Yeah.
whether, and in some ways that could be considered, that might give everybody peace of mind.
Mhm.
Mhm,
In some
Mhm.
ways that
mhm.
the last opportunity to weigh in isn't through the zoning change.
Right.
review.
Yeah. Well, I do appreciate, I read this information and I looked back about the pushback. I read the Penn Bay pilot about the pushback from the select board. And I appreciate the fact that you've just said, hey, let's not rush, let's give an opportunity. Because the concept is wonderful, but it's the application, the implementation of it that concerns me. And I like the fact that, there's a little more public input before the decision's made, whether it goes to the June or the November.
I think what we found, to speak more on your comment, in the past is if we've been thoughtful as a town about zoning changes and really taken a lot of public comment and done the legwork that's necessary to make zoning changes, we tend to have made better decisions than if we rush something through with an arbitrary deadline. To me, the legwork on something like this is really all about taking public comment and being very thoughtful about with citizen input. And like I said previously, I think it really starts first and foremost with this committee, just because of your interest in expertise as it relates to historic properties. And that certainly is a historic property, for the town. And whether it's classified that way or not, and now I understand that it is, certainly your input is as valuable as anybody's.
Yeah, thank you. I really want to hear what Maria has to say. I know I had one really broad kind of initial question, and that was, why is this being looked at as a Chestnut Historical District, Business District-wide amendment versus a site-specific exception?
I mean, I think Tom and I have different views on that in terms of whether it should be part of a larger change or not. The initial, from what I understand, initially the school came to the town saying this was something that they were interested in doing. And there was already some other things underway that town staff were working on that were related. And Jeremy said, we'll bundle those in. That included some broader changes to what would be allowed on the first floor in places like the Knox Mill. That all went to the planning board. Apparently it went through just fine. It came to the select board, and it wasn't so much about the school at that point. It was this broader initiative. And then a few properties were mentioned, and a lot of us said, whoa, essentially it was kind of the idea that we're giving up on the viability of anything other than housing in the Knox Mill. And that sent off a lot of warning bells for some people in the community, because the reason that residential isn't allowed at street level is because it tends to chip away at the vibrancy of downtowns, and certainly has done that in Camden, in terms of just the expectations for the level of noise in business districts and all of that. I think also over on Chestnut Street, some of the exemptions for historic properties allowing that has been detrimental, because it's brought in residential on the first floor. Just because it's a historic building, it was always an office on the first floor, and now you've got a full residence right next to a very loud business. And so that creates conflicts. And so many of us felt like we have not heard enough. We are not ready to do this. And then at the same time, something got mentioned like, oh, and the school's trying to do something too. And it was like that. And we were like, all right, so what you're really doing is this is for the Knox Mill. It was, I think, unfortunate, some of the way it was rolled out. And I think that's nobody's fault, but probably it was discussed a lot more at the planning board. And then the select board maybe felt like, wow, we don't even understand the goals here. So we said, no, we weren't ready to do that. And it wasn't so much about the school at that point. And we never even really talked about the school. It's just this passing comment. We voted that down for the Knox Mill, and everybody went on with their lives. And I think that left the school hanging a little bit with their proposal is like, what are they supposed to do now? And then they're realizing as the deadlines for the elections are coming up, like, whoa, hold on, what happened with our proposal? And I think they tried to bring that back in. And because of the criticisms about spot zoning, like the best practice is to have a more comprehensive, okay, this will affect these types of properties in these types of districts. Personally, for me, I am, that leaps in churches, and it might be true that the churches, you can't imagine that there's any danger of the Episcopal Church right now turning into condos, but we have other churches in town that have been turned into condos. And so for me, residential, there are different types of residential. Condos, the conversion of these buildings to condos is not necessarily a good thing for Camden. Rental apartments is a different thing that I would kind of be willing to make an exception to that first floor thing for, and especially if it's done kind of in partnership with a school, that I think we could work on some of the things that are concerning about having residential on the first floor. Maybe that could be mitigated through a partnership. So I think some of us think it should be, I would like to see the wording just specific to the school. I think there are other, good arguments for it to be the other. Not everybody agrees on that.
But there's no technical reason why it can't be a site-specific exemption.
There is no law against spot
Okay.
zoning. All you have to do is add for properties owned by school districts, and
That wording is in the.
right. And so I think that Jeremy put that was a comment that I made when it came to us, and I think he responded to that and put that in the language. And then since then, I've heard other people say this is spot zoning, and so if that's going to be a reason for other people to turn it down, not everybody agrees on that, and that might be one thing that you guys might have comments on. I don't know.
I'd love to hear you singled out spot zoning. What are your thoughts on that? Or
Sure. I think in general for communities, spot zoning is bad. I mean, spot zoning means that we're taking one building, one lot, and we're making special rules for that. And in general, I think it's bad regardless of application. It just doesn't seem to make sense to me that you're going to have a whole bunch of buildings in that neighborhood that have no residential on the first floor, but we're going to make an exception for this building because we agree that the cause is in the right place. There's a reason why we do comprehensive planning. It's to build better communities, better towns, better neighborhoods. And if next week it's another cause and it pulls our heartstrings, or we all agree that, there's some benefit to it, how far are we going to carry that on? In the end, I'm on the select board and I will absolutely have a vote. But I definitely want to hear what other people have to say. It's not just my community. And that's why I would like to get, like I've said multiple times, I'd like to get a lot of input on this. I've received emails with people who are saying both things. There's people who are saying that, they support this project, and there are people who are saying, this might not be as great as it sounds. Let's really take a good hard look at it. And that's the tack that I'd like to see myself. I personally don't understand why we should be beholden to a construction schedule. This is a big decision for the town of Camden. If this was a significant priority and the schedule was well known, I'm sure this could have been brought before us in November. And we could have had adequate time, multiple meetings, like we do for every zoning change. I mean, when we did the marijuana zoning change, there were multiple meetings with that on, the agenda from multiple committees, for the planning board, multiple meetings for the planning board, multiple meetings for the select board. The Nordhaven subdivision, that went before the planning board. I mean, they had a site review. They were up there. This was before they even approved the plan. This was just to change the zoning to allow that type of thing. if this goes through on a rush, this would be the first time that I've seen it done in a long time. And those other projects were, in some people's minds, very valuable and added value to the town. I'm not saying this one doesn't. I'm just saying anytime we make a zoning change in Camden, I think that we ought to be very deliberate, very thoughtful, and
makes
have
a lot
a
Makes a lot of
fully, a full process to do it.
Has there, historically been a lot of applications for site-specific exemptions? Is that an issue with the town?
I haven't been here but a year, but I think I haven't seen that much. They've been here longer, I think.
You can kind of read the ordinance, and I heard a previous code enforcement officer told me once that if you go through the Camden ordinance, you can almost put people's names next to, and it's always worded in this convoluted way. And I've often been somebody who said, oh, this is terrible, this is terrible, this is terrible. And here, because I'll say for properties built prior to 1994 in the blah, blah, blah. And it's done so that you don't have to have the fear of it impacting too many other things. So it's bad, and zoning is, there are a lot of different perspectives. The reason I do see the school as like a really different type of applicant that can be controlled in a different way, because there is no danger that the school allowing the school's not going to have a mechanism for turning that into condos that can appreciate and value and contribute to gentrification and all of that. So and since the school is going to need funding probably for this, there are other times when they're going to need support from the community. So, and there is going to be the site plan. I guess I'm trying to figure out how much opportunity through site plan review there will be for public input, or if by the time it gets to site plan review, it'll be too late to say, things that might be really important to the community. I think for me, I'm kind of in the same boat as Tom in just I want to make sure that I've thought about it completely. When it came to us on our agenda, there was zero. It didn't even say on the agenda, Elm Street School. And that I don't believe is anybody's fault or was intentional or anything, but I'm not prepared to vote on something that I haven't seen. Just if we want a special exception for one property, then I need to know a little bit more about the special use that's proposed. So we haven't seen a concept design. Some of the things they said were, that there was going to be continued public access for the playground. I think that making sure that building can continue to be like a vibrant community hub sort of in some way is really important. And I know that their intention sounded like is to do that. When people started asking me about this, I just didn't have answers. There's no cost estimate. There's and so I think that maybe once we have more information, and there can be some kind of a commitment in some way, like, okay, do we have protection against them starting the project and then radically changing the way that building looks? Just being able to answer that question, I think there's going to be a good way to answer it. And I think they don't want to make anybody upset either. I'm sure they want the building to continue to look mostly the same. But I just I didn't feel like maybe we had considered everything or had time to consider it, because we have made zoning changes in the past where I thought, oh, this all sounds great. And then people went to vote on it, and I realized I didn't understand it as well as I thought. And I wasn't able to justify it at that point. And so it was just a little fast. So
Before we go to our response, maybe this is a perfect time to hear from Maria. Is there any background or information you want to, share with us, or reactions to what we're saying here? Oh, we are on mute.
I think the process that like Allison outlined in terms of our history of how it happened with the zoning change request is pretty accurate. We've been talking about this for about a year within the school district in terms of the idea of the project. And I did go to the town, probably last May or June to talk about an ordinance change. And it did get lumped in with another thing that the town had been working on. It had been my understanding at the time when that didn't go forward, that that would continue to be worked on and likely make the June ballot. And I found out pretty much at the last minute that that actually wasn't going to happen. And that's, I think, why some of that feeling was that it came quickly, just because the timing to make it onto the June ballot came up pretty quickly, because I thought something else was going on within the town. But regardless, the school district has certainly thought about this for quite a long time and is in the really early stages of the plan. We hired an architect this winter, and that's Maple Street Designs in Camden, who is working on the project. Regardless of the ordinance change, we know we can put units on the second and third floor. And you feel like we could fit 4 to 6 units on the second and third floors. If we were able to include the first floor, we could likely fit 8 to 10 units. And it just all depends on kind of the configuration. We plan to do a mix of studio, 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom, and look at it as transitional housing for teachers who are moving here to take a job, which is most of the teachers we hire have to move here and relocate. And it has become an increasing problem for them to try to find housing anywhere within 50 miles of the district. So just as a tool to be able to hire people is why that idea came up. And, I was also aware that a lot of businesses are doing housing for their employees for the same reasons. It's just hard for employees to find housing. That, was coupled with the fact that we knew that the Montessori school was trying to move out and build their own building, and that we would have this building and have a strong desire to try to keep it in good working order, understanding that it's an important part of our community as kind of an iconic and historic building. And so basically those two ideas merged, recognizing that there's a lot of work that needs to get done to the building. We didn't need it for classroom space, but we had this other need and kind of thought it was a marriage of two good ideas in order to preserve the building and upgrade it and address another issue that we faced with housing. So that's really where the idea came from. And, our intention is to keep it looking generally like it looks now. And actually some of this, just the property in terms of the playground is we would probably upgrade the playground, remove the fence from where it is to just have easier public access. And the public would be able to access it all day long instead of just after school hours, which is the situation now. And then would also, we kind of have a vision on the corner of Elm and Union, like on the Elm Street side and at the corner, to make just a small park that would also be open to the public, that might have some trees and a walkway and a bench and feel a little bit more park-like. And then we own the parking lot that's associated with the building. So there's plenty of tenant parking on site as well. Just seemed like a great idea to address a number of different needs. So that's really where the school district is coming from. And I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody may have that are more specific than what I've said.
Hi, Maria. Michael Scaling. Have you considered using part of that first floor for some type of a public space? It seems, I know just from historic resources and historic documents, and we as a committee have been looking at where could we have a space to preserve so much of the documentation of this town, its history. And as a committee, we've kind of looked around, but it just dawned on me that that's such a wonderful space that I wonder if any consideration had been or could be made to part of that first floor being kind of devoted as a community space, not that would be kind of open to community and perhaps historic resources.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth considering. Obviously, it's not a consideration that the school district would naturally have because the school isn't aware of what the town's needs are in terms of, that kind of space. So, I mean, I think the school would be open to that conversation. We hire between 25 and 30 teachers each year. So we understand that the need for housing is pretty significant. And I don't know the square footage of what you might be talking about, but I think it's a conversation that the district would entertain.
Okay, thank you.
That's a great question, Michael. Any other questions? Do anybody have any kind of initial reactions?
I had one other. In your design, or what I've read, it looks like you're going to try to preserve the outside, at least the outside facade, as a historic building, much like it looked when it was built and, as it's evolved. And is that something you fully, intend to do, to keep the fenestration the same and to have the look and feel of that building as it's been for, 100 years, 120 years?
Yes, we certainly don't intend to do anything with the footprint of the building. The only thing that's been discussed, and we are really far away from making any kinds of decisions. We haven't seen any conceptual designs, partly because it's hard for the architect to get going without knowing if we're going to use the first floor for apartments in terms of the configuration. The only thing that has been considered is potentially on one side of the building, putting dormers on the third floor, so that any units on the third floor, you could use a little bit more space on the third floor because of the angles of the roof. I've seen a mock-up. One of the applicants who didn't get hired had a mock-up. And, I thought it actually almost enhanced the look. It was on the stop and go side of the building, and it followed the exact same lines as the current bell tower. But, that's just the only thing that has ever been discussed and probably will ever be discussed in terms of altering anything. Part of what we're looking at is to do it as inexpensively as possible. So, even for us, if cost were the only factor, it would depend on the cost of doing something like that. And, we know that the design itself would go through a public process and would get input and feedback. And we're just not at that stage yet. But the intention is to definitely keep it looking like the Elm Street School has looked for 155 years.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that? Thank you. Maria, the egress that does come with residential construction, has that been considered on the impact on the exterior of the building?
Well, we've looked at the egress mainly for the third floor. And if we did, I'm assuming we'd try to use some of the third floor because there's a lot of space on the third floor of the building. And our plan right now is to have the 2-bedroom apartments go to the third floor with an internal staircase within the apartment, as opposed to trying to have an egress in a hallway on the third floor that would require a completely different stairwell that would have a much more significant impact. So we're looking in terms of cost is driving a lot of the things that we've thought about in terms of, just having to meet codes and regulations. And it has, the front Elm Street side and then the Wood Street or maybe that's not Wood Street, but whatever the street is on the backside. It does have those two egresses, which I think is all that's needed unless we had a hallway on the third floor would require something different.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Maria. I'm wondering what the cost estimates you have are. I know that sort of the reality of all of this can change, but one of the things that was talked about a lot when we were discussing MET and Rose Hall was that the school district had what you felt was a plan to build the building that you needed for Zenith and the administrative offices, a plan to build a new building that would be much less expensive than renovating MET. And I know I was arguing ferociously on the other side of that. But is there, I would love to see the Elm Street School turned into housing, but in terms of the school district doing it in the most cost-effective way, what are your thoughts on the cost effectiveness of this and the likelihood of funding? And do we know ballpark how much you think it might cost?
I mean, my best guess is probably between 3.5 and 4.25 if we did it as modestly as we could. Our plan, we do have a funding plan, although we don't know how much it would cost until we have a plan and we know what we're doing. And that would be if we were to renovate all 3 floors. But again, we don't know because we don't know what the outcome of this zoning ordinance changes. We don't know what the cost will be because we don't know how much we're going to be renovating. So we're in a little bit of a catch-22 in terms of moving forward and having some of these numbers. But our plan would be, and we are going to try to start fundraising. I've actually already started working on fundraising for this project. We're trying to fundraise a significant portion. We have some money in our capital reserve that we would contribute. We think we can get historic tax credits, and then we would probably go to bond with a bond payment that the rental income would cover, so we wouldn't have to have a taxpayer impact. So our plan is to work as hard as we can to not have a taxpayer impact from this project.
So the historic tax credits, I mean, that was going to be my next question. And I spoke with Patrick a little bit about this yesterday. I guess that was some of my frustration in hearing just the very beginning of the proposal is that if you read about how people are making this viable, it does generally involve historic tax credits as a major incentive, and that includes creative transfers to develop. That's why a school district can't take advantage of a tax credit.
It's actually not my understanding. We've talked to our lawyers about the historic tax credit, and he's sending me the names of some consultants that I'm going to work with who does think that the school district can do that and capture those historic tax credits. So that's something that we're looking into.
How do you don't pay? I guess that's the type of thing in terms of making it I do think there are ways, or I guess I would like to be satisfied that there are not ways that you could accomplish your project with all of the goals that you have with maybe a little bit of help and collaboration from some of town staff or committee members that have a lot of experience with the historic tax credit stuff. There are ways to protect the school and transfer it to a developer for 100-year leases and things like that. When you say you're going to fundraise for it, I think that's great, but I also think about all the other meetings that I go to where the library, the Snowball, Curtis Island, the Historical Society, just about every meeting I go to has a major component of it that is focused on a big capital campaign. And I think in a community the size of ours, we do have to kind of work together and figure out, we can't all be pulling from the same bucket. The 3 to 4 million, I mean, if that's really the case, that's, I guess, a little bit reassuring. It's just so hard for me to imagine that that's, do you have is that what Joe is saying? Because it cost $5 million to renovate MET, and that wasn't even a change of use.
Yeah, MET is so much bigger than the Elm Street School and required a lot of work. Had to take out staircases, put in new stairwells. We had to do a lot of things to meet the code requirements for the MET building.
But you're going to have to do, is there anything to suggest that that won't be necessary for the Elm Street School? I mean, I would love to hear, like, yes, we know that it's not going to be necessary because X, Y, and Z. I just think if maybe we had been able to see some of the same things that you all have reviewed, maybe that would be super reassuring.
Although the problem with that, Allison, is nothing that we're reviewing. And you know how it is if something gets out in the public and then it's different. We're at the very early stages of this project. We have not had an opportunity to go out to bid. The architect hasn't had an opportunity to go thoroughly review the building. We don't know exactly how much of the building we're going to renovate. So some of those answers can't be had until we have some more answers to what the landscape of this project is going to look like.
I have a question because I had always thought that historic tax credits only went to commercial buildings. That's in my mind. I think, Chris, I don't know. I think that's what I have always thought, that you couldn't get historic tax credits unless you had a commercial component. So I don't know. We should check into
I also
that.
think it looks like you might, in terms of the cost, it probably would become a taxpaying entity. Because it would cease to be a school. Well, what I've read from the assessing office, have you factored that into the cost analysis, that buildings that are used primarily for the purpose of housing employees cease to be tax exempt?
No, I haven't looked into that yet.
And that might be something that the town, I don't know if we have the power to do rebates or if that's something that the town could waive, but I think that's an automatic thing. I guess it's just things like that that I would be curious about. And that's where there might be a benefit to transfer to somebody that could take advantage of the tax credit and accomplish all of the things that the school wants to do. We also have trust funds at the town that are and very large numbers that are used for and can be used for a major project that would benefit, quote unquote, the poor and unfortunate residents of Camden. And I know that language is archaic, but it can be broadly applied. And you know, I'm just saying that if there were a little tiny bit more collaboration, we might be able to come up with better ways of funding some of this stuff.
So this may be drilling down too specifically, but you use the word rent. And I was just curious about that. So this housing would not be part of a compensation package for teachers, They would be charged rent.
Yeah. Yeah. They'd be charged rent.
Also, you talked about parking. So there would be no requirements or need for additional parking, that the existing parking would handle the 2 additional units?
Well, there actually are no requirements for parking in the first place in the B1 district. So the fact that we have a fairly sizable parking lot is a huge benefit. But there are no parking requirements in the zoning for that property right now.
I guess that's not really what I'm asking. What I'm asking is, with the addition of 2, additional units, would you expect there to be more street parking or what have you? Or is the additional parking probably going to handle those 2 additional units?
Well, I mean, it's hard to know, even in a studio apartment, if a person comes as one person or 2 people. So I haven't done analyses on people who are projecting parking spaces for various size apartments yet. I think there are, probably 16 parking spots that we have in that lot. So I don't know what 8 to 10 units would typically require for parking. So I'm not sure of that answer yet.
Okay, thank you.
And I mean, we're really trying to move away from off-street parking requirements as much as possible. It's very poor policy and it's resulted in way too much of our downtown space being used for parking. But I actually see that as another potential benefit of it being the school district there, if we were really willing to work together, because we know there will be parking complaints from neighbors. There are so many parking complaints just because of the church being there. I think that doesn't mean that the church shouldn't be there. It means that we need to learn to use our streets wisely and to take turns parking. But it could be that if they were willing, they could say, okay, well, we have a housing opportunity here for you. It's a scarce resource. We also have a middle school up the street that you can leave your car at night. You only are entitled to one car to be parked at the school or at the apartments. There are some people that don't have a car at all, and maybe some of them ideally in the future would be people that are walking to work right up the street at the middle school, and maybe in some future scenario there'll be more people that won't need cars. So I mean, it's kind of, if we could work together on all of that stuff, I think it's sort of an exciting opportunity.
So another question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
One concern is a handicap apartment that you'd have to provide. But if you don't put it on the first floor, then there's lots of complications of putting it on the upper floor. And I'm just wondering if that's, also it includes its own parking space and route, stuff like that. So.
Are you saying there's a requirement that all apartments have at least one handicap?
No, but you have to have a certain percentage of their
Okay.
units that are totally accessible. And if they're not allowed on the first floor, then you have to put it on the second floor, which makes things more complicated with elevators and things like that.
Do you mean that it involves having elevator where it wouldn't otherwise, or the complications you're talking
You have to
about?
provide an accessible route from your car to your apartment door and
Mhm.
inside the apartment. And it's preferable to put that on the first floor, but
Mhm.
is there going to be an elevator, and how will you accommodate the accessible apartment?
Were you able to hear that, Maria?
I was, obviously I'm not a building code expert. I'm expecting our architect to help address all those kinds of questions.
It's sounds like a fun project. I've worked on a building at Washington Academy that was almost the identical building, which they were built often for schools but it was stayed a school, it wasn't apartments.
Allison, do you know, with Jeremy's specific language here about school district, is there any other property that this amendment could potentially apply to, or is this a way of really effectively creating spot?
Yeah, I don't think so, unless they own property we don't know about, but I don't think that's the case.
And it's not a foreseeable,
Unless they end up buying up lots of additional property in that area, and then it would, but that would be a public process anyway, so.
Okay.
So that could be a good or a bad thing, that it truly only applies to one property, but.
Anybody else have any more comments? What I would suggest is that, we've just been handed this last night, and maybe we have a special meeting about this to kind of be able to come up with a consensus recommendation or input to the select board. So perhaps in 2 weeks, we'll talk offline, but have a meeting to discuss just the specific, how does that sound?
Oh, sorry, there is just one other thing that does come up a lot, and in terms of, with any renovation, there's demolition and stuff goes to the dump or it doesn't go to the dump, and opportunities for reuse. I guess that's something that we sometimes don't think about until right at the end when everybody gets upset about something not getting, doors being thrown in a dumpster or something like that. I know you have people on your staff that
Yes.
are real, Danny's like, I'm gonna keep my eyes down right now. So I imagine that's something that you'll already be thinking about, but
Oh, sorry, Maria, you're on mute.
I was like, oh, maybe not.
I mean, Allison, we're 2 years away from, hopefully only 2 years away from, 2.5 years from starting this project. So there's a lot, obviously, that will be left to be done. So that's not something that I've looked into depth with yet. Right now, we've been primarily concerned with trying to figure out what we can and can't do with the building.
I mean, I guess I'm just saying that because to me, it's helpful. And I think for some others, just helpful to hear that, that's something that everybody's open to and willing to be thinking about going forward if it does happen. It's it's a place with lots of memories and lots of excitement for people. And it's, just hearing willingness to have those types of conversations, I think to me is reassuring and probably would be to other people.
Yeah, well, we actually, one of the things that we did this year with our strategic plan is that we've incorporated having the UN Sustainability Development Goals as part of our decision-making framework. And we actually just did a whole new protocol for procurement and disposal that fits really well within. So the school district as a whole is really doing a lot in terms of trying to be sustainable and do those things. So I think that naturally would be part of our process because it's actually in our protocols and in our strategic plan.
Great.
All right, I just wanted to ask one last question, not to you, Maria, to Shanley and Allison and Tom. In terms of the chicken and the egg, Maria obviously needs to know broadly that an amendment like this will be approved before she moves forward with design and what have you. But we're kind of being put in the position of, at least at a very preliminary stage, being asked to kind of tacitly endorse something that we have no idea what it's going to be effectively. So I'm just curious, your thought process on this kind of chicken and the egg. I know there's many steps before it actually goes to a groundbreaking and what have you. And this is a very first step, but I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
Well,
I
was going to say, probably at this point, we give feedback in the form of questions and not really, we're not ready to make a
Sure.
decision anyway.
Yeah.
So what questions would we have regarding our particular historic resource interest? And how this zoning change may affect other historic properties.
I think that's really
Yeah.
accurate. Do you have any additional thoughts about that? Or
I mean, I think that's a little bit maybe the way the select board feels or the way I felt we're being asked to endorse something that we don't know what it's going to be. And so I think, I personally am really in favor of somebody actually trying to do something about the affordable housing issue rather than 5,000 committees that just talk about it, because there's always going to be a reason to not do something. We've gotten really close at every town-owned property forms 8 years, 20 years of committees with excellent recommendations. And when it actually comes down to it, there are objections, no matter how awesome and comprehensive the process is. So I'm trying to balance that knowledge with the fact that but can they at least promise that the playground will be public forever kind of thing? What's reasonable? And I think different people answer that in different ways. I was sort of trying to think, for me, what's something that could happen that would be a deal breaker that would make me wish that I didn't support this? There aren't that many things. I think the thing would be that like it turns into something that they get halfway into and they realize it's going to be way more expensive than we thought, and we have to ask for taxpayer money, and then we can't, then the library doesn't meet their fundraising goal or something like that. So, how can we kind of make sure we know what it's going to cost before we throw our endorsement behind it by changing the zoning? And then, if people were to become upset later that it really changed the way it looked, or if all of those people living on the first floor started complaining about Stop and Go being open all the time, or we start doing, concerts on the Village Green and we're like bombarded by teachers complaining about music after 11, which it sounds funny, but so I want to, be supportive, but I want to make sure that it's not anything that we end up regretting. But, and also understanding, like, at what point does our process slow them down to the point where we turn something viable into something not viable? I don't want to do that either, just for the glory of saying we went through a glorious process, so.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
If the school administrative district owns the building and they get halfway through the project and decide that they can't afford to do it, is there anything that keeps them from selling the building to, God, I hate to say it, but a developer? I don't know. I mean, that's
Yes.
when I first read this, that was the first thing that came to mind.
Yes, that's
a
one of the things.
possibility.
That's one of the, my understanding is that is one of the things they would have to ask for. They would, before they can sell it to another party, they have to offer it to the town.
To the town.
They can, if there's a reasonable expectation that it could be needed in the future for school purposes, they can lease it for 4-year increments to another entity.
Mhm.
But yeah, they can't, they wouldn't, they also wouldn't be able to get partway through it and demolish it without asking for permission unless it were declared a hazardous building.
Could we begin?
And can I say something else about that? We couldn't get halfway through a building not knowing we had the money anyways.
Right.
We'd have a signed contract and we would know exactly how we're planning to pay for it. School district cannot overexpend any of its budgets. So there are internal controls that would prevent that from happening. And taxpayers would have to approve any loan payment that we would get for this project anyways. So there's a whole other public, there are all kinds of public pieces to this project because we're a school district. And one of those is any loan that we would get for the building, which, we're imagining it would be in an amount that the rental income could cover, and that rental income would actually also cover maintenance of the building and management of the building. So that's how we're on our end calculating and figuring out what we need from each bucket, and what's the financial strategy to do this with the noble goal of trying to have it not actually impact taxpayers at all. But we can't overextend and would have a signed contract for a certain amount of money. So that wouldn't happen in the middle of a project.
Okay, thank you.
Maria, I do have a question about that. You referenced using reserves to pay for the construction. Doesn't that, I know we're backtracking a little bit here in the meeting, but doesn't that impact the taxpayers using reserves for this project versus for something else?
That is one way to look at it. Our capital reserve is money we have in the, so to speak, in a savings account that we've put aside for capital projects. As a school district, this is a priority capital project. So we would be spending it in a way that we think is responsible and prudent and aligns with our priorities.
Okay, thank you. I would go back to when talking about what the select board would be looking forward to is questions. You nailed it, right? We want viable questions for the board and for the school district. That's the best thing we can do is ask questions. Yeah,
Yeah.
hit us up with your best questions, especially questions that are related to your purview as a board. And we'll look them over as a board, and I know the school district will as well. And those are the things that we want to know before we consider making a zoning change.
That's great. Thanks, Ron, and thanks, Tom. Maria, thank you for joining us and informing us and for all your work on this project.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. So we'll set a meeting for us to continue discussing this. So moving on to old business and the Chestnut Walking Tour. Just a, what? Oh, no. It's good news.
It is.
It is good news. Yeah. So Tracy's had begun conversations with our printer.
Miranda?
Mhm.
Good.
So we're getting progress there, and I expect us, we'll have some approvals along the way for people to look at mock-ups. But we're, I think, on course to have this printed in time for spring, say May. So I think that's good news. So keep a lookout. We're hoping that at our next meeting, we'll have a mock-up for everybody to look at and review. Not much more to say there. Any information on the St. Thomas Bell Tower?
They're still working on their report that they have to submit to us, or to the town, I should say.
Okay. And Michael, Curtis Island.
Okay, so Curtis Island, the big thing is the town, as I reported before, is going 50-50 in terms of supporting a historic conditions report of what the conditions are really on Curtis Island. And that will inform a historic preservation plan. And so the first 2 days, the historic preservation or historic architects LLC, or Historic Building Architects is the group that is going to be doing this. So they're going to be here on the March 25th and 26th. Those 2 days, they'll be on the island, and they'll be on the island the following month as well to continue the condition study. So that's all, we're lining up to figure out how do we get them onto the island and hoping like heck the weather is decent those 2 days. And so anyway, they'll be here. But one of the things that we've considered, we have a board, the historic, the Curtis Island Lighthouse Foundation has a meeting, a board meeting, and it's on the 26th, and it's going to be 4 to 6 o'clock, and I'm in the process of scheduling it, and wanted to take the first hour, and this is a little tentative right now, but the first hour of that to hear from the lead of that project to just describe what they're doing and any initial things after first 2 days. So what we're thinking of doing is holding the meeting probably in this room or in the K. Tucker room. And I've scheduled this room, but I think the select board may be having a meeting starting at 6:30 that night, but Janice and I are kind of working out the details. But anyways, there's a possibility of, coming in at 4 o'clock, anyone from the town that wanted to kind of get a little input onto what was going on. In the next day or so, I'll put an invitation out. And I think this would be for, town officials and select board members to be able to hear what their process is and ask any questions about that as well.
Michael, one thing that if you could help us remember, if we're going to have that open to select board members, we probably ought to advertise it as a public meeting. That's he's suggesting March 26th at 4 p.m. Because if we had a third member here, one of us would have to leave. As soon as we have 3, we have a quorum and we're not allowed to meet together. So I like the idea, I'll do my best to attend, but
And the
well, he's suggesting 4 p.m. and we're 6:30 for our workshop. I'm not No promises, no promises. But if you do want more than 2 board members to be able to attend,
Okay,
unfortunately, we do need to advertise it as public
okay.
meeting.
Look,
Will it be
It
recorded?
just is what it is.
that part of it
I
would.
mean, so if Sophie's there, she's going to kick you out.
You know, I don't want to jump the gun here because I've got to talk to some of the other board members, but we were just thinking it would be a chance to learn a little more about, you know, what the process is they're using. And if we do it, the foundation board meeting will start after that meeting if we do, and if we go public. So Tom, let me get a little more information here in the next day or so and validate that. Okay. And if we don't do it then, we would definitely be doing it later on at the end of the second visit, or even after that when the report's back. So we fully know what's going on. And I fully expect those would be full public meetings. I just hadn't kind of considered that. And we do have a board meeting that is not an, there'll be a part of that 2 hours when we'll be in official session as a board. Yeah.
Just to ask, without hopefully opening a can of worms, has any of the storm of the last month impacted any of the, design and work that you're doing at Curtis Island, or is that still to be determined?
It's to be determined, but Allison did a drone video of the
photos.
island after the 2 January storms, and the roof held up. It's still intact. I'm going to try to get out there. Also, Charlie Conover's doing some drone work, and Charlie was going to be kind of taking a look at it. And Allison, I don't know if you've done anything since this last storm 2 days ago. Yeah.
No, I haven't done anything since 2 days ago, but I'm always happy to if
Yeah.
anybody asks me.
Okay.
So
No.
don't hesitate to ask.
Okay.
It makes me feel useful with the
Yeah,
drone and not
It
just.
was really helpful to see that, it seemed to hold up, but we're anxious to get on the island and just really see that, anything else happen. So,
One of the things that I know in the past on the Conservation Commission, it's come up a lot, the Curtis Island stuff, because of, isn't there something in the deed about, the island is sensitive ecologically and and I know you guys are acutely aware of that. I haven't mentioned any of this to the Conservation Commission.
mhm.
Have you been in touch with them at all, or?
No,
I was a little nervous starting to think about the construction process and what that entails. Everything in the past has been sort of drag stuff out there little by little.
mhm.
And I can't remember where I heard this, if it was from you or from Audra, from somebody talking about the need for piers and floats and docks. And
Mhm.
is
Well-
that something that you guys are?
We are
Pursuing?
starting to talk about that, to have safe access to the island during restoration, and then also for public. And, but there's such a delicate balance between, how much usage it gets, how much traffic it gets. If you put a sort of floating dock system out there that would allow contractors and others to get onto the island safely, how would we manage that in terms of, public access and other boats? And, it's a conundrum that we'll need to address. I mean, with the town, in terms of how much access do you sign up to go out? Do you, what do you ultimately do? But it is one of the things that will have to be decided upon. But to do the restoration work that we're anticipating in this conditions assessment will really define how much of that and how big it is. But we're trying to move forward on how could we get some type of a temporary, at least temporary system, docking system that would allow the transfer of people, contractors, materials, would-be granting agencies and donors to it.
I'm nervous that this is going to create conflict in the future. And I don't have a set opinion on it right now because I don't have enough information, but I can see it being a big source of conflict as we sort of ratchet up what the expectations are in terms of the type, the condition that building or those buildings need to be maintained to, and then the sort of ever increasing need to have contractors going out there, and then the public. And I just, I definitely worry about that a little bit in terms of like the unintended consequences and
Yeah. Well,
public support. And so I think we should, it'd just be good to start that conversation early, I think, with probably the Conservation Commission, so that we avoid putting, Audra or Jeremy or whoever else is involved, we avoid putting them in the middle of it as people start to have concerns, because I've seen it happen before where a couple of people have an idea, let's start renting out Curtis Island and doing this, and it seems great from one perspective, and then other people catch wind of that, and then they come, and it all ends up just taking up a lot of town staff time to be mediators. And they so it'll be great to see, I think, once the conditions assessment is complete, then we can, as the foundation and the select board and the public, we can look at that and say, okay, well, this is what's wrong with it. This is what could be done. What's realistic for us to maintain? What can we agree on together?
Will you plan I think that he's planned a public meeting for April.
Well, we don't have that set, but one of the ideas, and it would be discussed, but would be to have 2 or 3 public sessions just to say, what's your idea, public folks, about the island, its use, its future, access, and just kind of opening a discussion and getting input from people.
You mean a visioning?
Kind of visioning of what's the picture of this in the future. We did this in Belfast quite a few years ago, held some sessions where the public could come in and kind of share their pictures and their perspectives. And it helped to really form where the development went at that point. So
I know Audra's feeling, and everybody is feeling a lot of pressure with the budget and so many things. So there'll be a good public discussion.
So that's kind of the major thing, but I am looking to ask the town to put some money in the budget for the safe access to the island. And I'm going to be pursuing that.
This year?
Have been, yep. And part of that is we're going to ask people for funding, and we have been raising funds, and we haven't really fully gone public with it. But some of the big donors want to see, the town owns the island, the town should be putting some money and being visible about it. And so in the past years, there has been money put in, and part of that funded this thing that's happening this year. I didn't want to go a whole year before major, renovation starts without dealing with some things that are going to help renovation get going. And that's really accessing the island. So,
like a land attached float or a pier, or, we're very far into the
yeah, right now,
regulations on piers. And
right now, there was some initial talk about a pier. What we've done is really, let's forget that. Let's do floats that can be taken in and out in a series of, 3 pieces of float, maybe even using what's possibly reusable out of Steamboat Landing. Those floats, I guess, are going to be exchanged, so perhaps those floats would work. And I think they're technically okay to use, will be. So anyway,
That's a big change, though, making it so that larger vessels can just pull right up to the
no,
island.
yeah, I mean, theoretically, a larger vessel could, but that's where the ordinance, or not ordinance, but the rules and guidelines in terms of how you access, how many people can access it at once. I mean, these are all things that will need to be considered. We don't want,
Somebody to staff that in terms of policing it and.
yeah, Allison, I don't have any answers.
Okay,
They're
I'm just-
things that need to be, they're under consideration, and before it ever flows forward, we'll need, really discussion on that.
Are those questions the Conservation Commission can answer as far as minimizing impact?
I guess I just want to, the thing that happens where lots of people do a lot of work on this, and by the time it ends up getting somewhere, then it gets shot down by, I just want to avoid you doing more work than, I guess I didn't realize there was, something was coming forward so quickly. So anyway, maybe we can, I'm guessing the types of concerns that would be raised would be most likely, Conservation Commission related. And so maybe that would be a way to
Good.
start the discussion so that it doesn't, if, the budget proposal, when it comes somewhere, it can have been talked about a little bit more. I mean, stop me whenever you want, Tom. Maybe we can hash this all out at the select board when it finally gets there. But it might be better for there to have been, more conversation
Yep. And
with related groups ahead of time.
From a fiscal year 2025 budget standpoint, I think before the select board commits significant money to that, we're going to need to know the scope of what it is that, is being done out there, and what the contractor's needs are. Who's going to be responsible for the floats would be a long-term question. Short-term would be what the needs of the contractor are, and then what's the long-term plan for those? Are we going to leave them in for accessibility? We have done some projects in the past where I think we've created a monster. An idea would be like the Snowball, not to say that I think the Snowball redevelopment was great, but one of the things, the unintended consequences of the Snowball redevelopment is it now costs much more to run the Snowball on an annual basis than it used to. We just have more associated costs. The expectations are higher. And I'm not opposed to higher expectations for Curtis Island, but it is something that everybody has to digest. Are we going to make it handicapped accessible? Are we going to, when we start talking about those things, those are all grand ideas. But when we go into the budgeting process, it's definitely things that need to be hashed out, discussed. We have a whole budget committee, and then we have 5 members on the select board that all have different points of view. So coming to some consensus. If you'd like to get something on the FY 2025 budget, I would suggest you keep it focused on the bare minimum that you need to get your renovation kicked off. I think that would be something that probably the town manager and the select board could support. I know I'm speaking a little out of turn, but from my perspective, yeah, sure. Yeah, I don't know if it's possible, but that would be the only way. I mean, we have a type, we're adding, if you haven't seen the preliminary budget yet, we're adding, especially for EMS and some other projects, we're adding significant amounts. We're adding over 10% to the town budget as it's proposed right now. And I know that the select board has a lot, and all those things are very valuable to the town, I believe. But for this project, we are going to want to make sure that anything that we do put into it, if we do for fiscal year 2025, is stuff that we know that we're going to want and need and use for, at a minimum, the historic restoration that I think that we're all moving towards.
Okay, well, I think this will help inform your upcoming meeting, right?
Thank you, Tom.
Okay.
And one last thing, I don't, it's not possible during budget season. You would not believe the agendas for the next two meetings because those are the last two meetings we have before we go to the town ballot. But I'd be happy to do a workshop with you and anybody else who's involved, or this committee for that matter, if this is the committee to work with on the Curtis Island. It's more, I see it as more as a FY 2026 thing. But if you want to do a workshop or that sort of thing, reach out to me and Allison, and we'll do our best to get you at a minimum on a select board agenda, if not a full-on workshop to kind of hash out these details.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be hashed out, and I'm trying to balance the ability of this foundation to raise money, and we've got a lot of kind of good leads. We've got a lot of things going, and so I'm looking at this from how do we show the full engagement of the town, and that's something we have to work on, and keep the fundraising going so that in another year, my picture would be some significant restoration starting not this summer, but the following summer. And that needs to align with the money that's collected, how much the town's willing to commit to this. And the foundation board is fully focused and sees the town as a major partner in this in terms of the resources that are gained. And so anyway, there are a lot of considerations here, and I know we can't operate in a vacuum.
Sure, we understand that. We appreciate the work you're doing. We understand that you need us as a viable partner.
Okay.
It does come down, there's some timing issues here. So we'll get it together as quick as we can to put, let's you and I be in touch, and Allison too, of course, because she's historic resources. But
Okay.
yeah, I understand why you need us to be a partner in this.
Okay, thanks, Tom.
That's great. And as always, Michael, the work you're doing is just amazing. Your commitment to the project, incredible. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. I'll just make it brief. I've wanted to connect with you.
Yeah,
Charlie Conover is one of
yeah.
my students. So he's interested in at least doing something that I think we could do immediately, which is build some furniture. That I know there's some furniture that's been in disrepair, and build some new furniture. And we also still have materials from Camden Harbor. So it would all be reuse.
Yeah.
And this could also lead to like youth being involved, which could hopefully help show the town that this is something that young people want to. So I could see this as being a
Absolutely.
good sort of first step that wouldn't require a lot of
And
going through a lot of bureaucratic red tape just to get some things in motion.
Charlie Conover, who's one of your guys, he's an advisor to our board, and he's been just terrific to work with and sees ways to work together. So anyway, long story short, we're going to figure out a way to build furniture that's needed. And my thinking is going, hey, how about tackling the oil house that's been cleaned up of lead paint and restoring that? I don't know. We'll talk about it. But there's a lot of pieces on the island that could be done with volunteers. And this is a wonderful way to get young people involved and building things that'll really work on the island and learning about the history and the maritime history concurrently. So we had talked about me talking with your group. So
Yeah, I look forward to doing that
we'll talk
soon.
about that.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I think there's no doubt the Curtis Island is one of the jewels of Camden, and it's somebody polishing it is vital. So, all right. So as we discussed earlier, the Jacobs Avenue Historic District is kind of on pause until May when Anne resumes work on that. And Will, thank you for joining us. Sorry to jump at you, but hello and thank you.
It's sorry to join via Zoom and not be there in person.
Oh, Hey,
had enough meeting so thank you for allowing me to jump in. And I wanted to give a quick update on, I had some marching orders on the natural national landmark
mhm.
program. So I looked into it. It's a voluntary permission from landowners that does not impose any new land use restrictions. So I think we were thinking about this in preservation of sightlines along the coast. But I don't see this as although I don't see this as the tool or the kind of the mechanism that we would utilize in that effect, but it seems as though the town has responded appropriately to the storms and are taking the necessary precautions in ordinance language and also doing what we recommended a year ago, a harbor study and analysis. So I'm very grateful for that. And so I don't see a need or really for this national landmark or requesting that individual private property owners, although unless it be their own interest. However, I'll bring it back to Curtis Island and Curtis Island Overlook, is that I think it would be, not to add more to the plate, and there's no timeline on this, but I think it would be really neat for the town to receive this type of distinguishing accolade towards delineation to those two properties. The Overlook being that it's public access, it's owned by the town, it's frequently visited, and also the Curtis Island, that those two, in my mind, could be potential landmarks within this natural national landmark program. So I just throw that out there as a potential, but it doesn't add any new land use restrictions. It would provide, I believe, let me see if I could, I can share this link too. I believe it might provide some level of resources. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
No. Okay, so this defines what it is. It's designated by the Secretary of Interior. It's all through the National Park Service. We went over last time the current sites in Maine. A lot of them are wetland-based sites.
Mhm.
So there's a biological and geological feature that is a component. I see both of that. I see that the Overlook and Curtis Island has, as Allison mentioned, that ecological value. Who manages it by the Park Service? One of the goals is just the preservation of these sites, enhance scientific and educational value. Natural features, terrestrial aquatic system, so land and sea. Goals of natural heritage protection. Let's see.
Will, what is the process of application?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've never gone through this before, so I'd be happy to kind of reach out to the National Park Service. Should there be interest for us to even, I know there's a lot going on with Curtis Island, but I almost see this as a similar, we have a great fire district, does this give some
Cachet,
credibility.
yeah.
credibility to the Curtis Island Overlook and from a, is this a, do we view that as a natural national landmark? Does the town view it that way? I'm just throwing this out here as an assumption. So I don't, but if there's interest, in, or maybe there's another site that I'm not even thinking about right now that this could, they all can be, they can be removed, you can, it's not a,
Mhm.
you don't have to, it doesn't seem like there's a heavy lift and there's not like, oh, once you're in it, then you have this burden
Right.
on.
Well, and then, sorry, Will, in the interest of time, I know Allison has a question. I'd be interested in your just next level of fact finding. And I do think there's potential value in this, but Allison, what's your question?
Yeah, I would just say that I agree. I do see value, and especially it's
Yeah.
easy when there's not, when it doesn't automatically add another regulatory level where you're saying somebody can't do something. Very similar to the putting something on the National Register of Historic Places. We're saying this place is culturally special and significant. And I think that really what is special and significant about this area is what brought people to this area to begin with, and that we haven't done enough to recognize the natural and geologic specialness of some of these places. And it really can't hurt. And it does, even though it doesn't usually tell an individual property owner they can't do something with their property, it adds, like on the NERPA applications, there is a question that says, how far are you from a national landmark or sites of natural significance? And so it just, it's something for people to think about. So to me, it sounds great if we could, even if it were just providing information to property owners, like if you want to do this for your property, you could, or we could talk about the town doing it.
Great. So, Will, if you are still willing to kind of spearhead that project, I'd love kind of next level of fact finding. And the fact that it does not seem to be much of a red tape, it seems like it's only a positive.
I view it analogous with Knox County's Soil and Waters land conservation. Our property, we went through an assessment with Rebecca Jacobs. She deemed our property to be a conservation property. So now we have a sign in our front yard that says, this is a conservation property. There's no tax benefits. There's no, it'd be great if there was, but there's nothing that, and if we decide to plant an invasive species, then that's at our own, volition. And so I think this would be neat, to Allison's point, to add credibility, I didn't think about the application. That's also further, emphasizes, the credibility of these, but I see it as if we could focus on town properties rather than forcing it upon private owners.
Yeah.
When you look into it further, I'd be interested in how much exposure it creates for the island, because, that's a concern, but I don't think we need to discuss that right now. I just wanted to bring it up as something to ask when you ask about the program. Does it bring a lot more people to the place?
You're exactly right. I mean, there's probably a dozen properties listed in Maine, so it would be listed as a site, and, people who are looking to, visit all of those sites.
Take a break from all the wetlands.
So that is a concern. That would definitely be a concern.
They're like, what are we going to
Yeah.
visit?
Well, thanks for doing it.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Will. And I just love the idea of the town calling attention to, the value we see in Curtis Island.
I think the Overlook too. I mean, that's such the Overlook is such a special property there that is frequently visited, and I don't know the boundary lines, but it's
80
really
feet, 80 feet is the right of way that the town has. It's massive, and we've been tricked into believing it's less,
Somebody
but
got her started.
yeah. All right. I was holding back, but it's 80 feet.
Yeah,
The work that
Will,
Parks-
I think that's a great concept, because now you've got the island, and you've got a kind of a land place, and we're out, Pat and I are out there a lot walking, and there are always people looking, and
Well, and also, just my understanding is there is a plaque component to it, and connecting those two pieces of land, as you say, the island to the place where you see it, could be a really nice synergy. And what Parks and Rec has already done there with the new signage, I think is wonderful. So, yeah.
Thank you.
It's
Will.
almost the handicap access to Curtis Island, in some odd way.
It's
that you
kind of
have- if you-
It's a visual access, and
Yeah.
and the foundation will be putting out different, videos and things that you could go right there and click on it and see the history, a short history of the island. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity for expanding public knowledge.
That's great.
I saw you turn your head at that comment, but I have a neighbor who tried to canoe out to Curtis Island. He's in his 80s. He wasn't able to make it, and now he goes to the Overlook to visit the island. And so there is a component to, a sense of joy that Overlook property provides.
Yeah.
In drawing that connection, I think is really important.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's a wonderful Zen place.
We could also bring the Historical Society has that three-dimensional, what do you call it, a diorama? Is that the right
Diorama.
word?
Mhm.
That could come over here
Yeah.
or somewhere.
Yeah.
If you join the board of the Historical Society, of course, but,
Okay. In the interest of time, thanks everybody for the amount of time they put in today's meeting. So in terms of new business, I know we have an important update on the yacht club, but if I could just change the order just briefly, I just wanted to acknowledge, because I don't feel like I really have, Danny as a new member, and the excitement level of having you be here is off the charts.
Oh,
So thank you very much.
And likewise.
And
I'm
I
very
really
excited
look
to be here
forward
myself.
to, I love that already, people are excited about how can what you're doing tie into what's happening at Curtis Island. But I think it really will have a huge impact as we go forward with the historical preservation ordinance and thinking how deconstruction can be a component of that. So that's what I'm really excited about.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now, Michael, I know we've got a lot to talk about with the yacht club.
Okay, so I'm going to try to be really fast here, but I came across a notification that there was historic preservation money available for historic buildings, National Register buildings that were endangered because of ocean rise and the storm surges, and to make them more resilient for the future. So I called the state office, the state historic preservation office, and said, hey, can I apply for that? And I was thinking from a foundation perspective, the 25,000 that we're coming up with to support the town's 25,000 commitment to this assessment. So that 25,000 I would get through this state grant. And I was quickly told no, and there's a very short window on it. So I talked with Jeremy. I talked with Jim Bennett. I've gotten to know Jim Bennett, who's doing a lot of studies on the storm surge situation that we have. And I immediately went to, the yacht club. It's been damaged pretty badly, the piers, all the outside. And just this yesterday, a couple days ago, I took videos of what was happening, and it's truly endangered. And that's a John Calvin Stevens historic building, and it's one of his preeminent buildings. It's on the National Register. So it fit this whole thing. So very quickly, I said, can we do a grant? Can we go after this? And
Because the time frame
the
was
time
really
frame was so
It
short.
was like a week.
It's due the 24th, right?
It's due the 25th, 24th. So Jim and I started collaborating and sharing with Jeremy, this is what we're doing. Jeremy said, I don't have much time right now, given all the other things. And actually, congratulations for getting that big sewer grant recently. Yeah. But So there's an awful lot going on. I've just been kind of pushing it, rewriting it, talking with Gartley and Dorsey. And what the grant will do, it'll look at kind of it's called pre-development. So it's nothing about changing anything. It's about studying the situation and doing engineering work to study what's going to happen to that building. What are the options? You can raise it up. You can raise it up, move it back. You can change put a dam around it. I mean, there are all kinds of things you could do. So this study is to look at 2 to 3 options that could take place to preserve that. And we're thinking it's either going to be, it has to be raised up. So what does that entail? And then what will that entail in terms of regulation, in terms of, what you can and can't do, access to it, all kinds of things. So it's an exploratory grant that we're submitting. I submitted it yesterday for a draft review, and it's Jeremy's the one submitting it. He was sick, so I went ahead and forwarded on, again, with Jeremy's compliance here, or understanding. And so we'll have we should get information back from the state where the grant could be improved upon, but it just felt like an opportunity not to be wasted.
You did an amazing job with that grant. I can't believe you turned that around that quickly.
Well, we've got a lot of good people, Jeremy and Will Gartley and
Jim Bennett.
and Jim especially.
It's not a 2-page document.
Yeah.
It's an extensive application.
So
Yeah.
anyway, so we're hoping that this will give, and Allison, I'm sorry, I may not have, I've overlooked you. I mean, it's gone so fast that I've
You don't have
just
to, I'm just a
focused.
select board member. I think this is maybe going to be on our agenda. And what?
It is.
Oh.
Because one of the things I just got through in the past, a lot of committees have applied for grants and it became unmanageable for the town. I've been personally scolded in the past for encouraging that too much. And at first I didn't understand it because it was like, well, we're getting free money. What's the problem? But what has happened in the past is that it's the management of that grant once we get it that can be very intensive. And so I know that the select board is worried about just town staff time. There are so many projects going on and some frustration about things that have been prioritized in the past that we haven't gotten to. So I guess I maybe have a few questions about that, but also with the yacht club, there's a real issue with public access there. And if we're going to treat it, and some disagreement about that, and if we're going to work, and I think we should work more closely with them in the future, but a lot of people come to me and say that they aren't able to go down there. And so I think that's going to be something that needs to be talked about, but treating it like a public property that can receive grants through the town. Isn't the yacht club a 501c3 themselves?
Say that again.
Isn't the yacht club a 501c3? I think it would be great if the yacht club could apply for some of these grants and administer them themselves, because just the administration and the reporting is time consuming. So, making sure the yacht club goes through the process so that they're on board and they can take care of the management of that. Jeremy just has a lot on his plate. And if we ever want to be able to do things like the historic preservation ordinance, which I know this committee's been told in the past that we didn't have time for that. I've been told that I need to tell this committee that we don't have time for that. And so when we add more things to Jeremy's plate, I think we need to be strategic about that. and making sure like the yacht club is on board. I mean, I just
Mhm.
don't know. It does sound wonderful. but
I will check on whether they're five, it ran through my head last week.
Thank you, Rosalie.
I will check and see if they are 501c3, and we've got time in the next 2 weeks to change it up a bit.
But you've been talking with them too, Mike.
And we've been talking, yeah,
talking
I've
with
been
the yacht
talking
club.
with them as well.
But it would be great if they can apply for the grant sometimes too, because I really, and I'm saying this only because I've had to be told it a bunch of times and finally understood. Project Canopy was an example of these, $8,000, $20,000 opportunities that turn into,
I understand.
you know what I mean? It ends up being, it's almost would be better just to pay the money than to get the grant sometimes.
Well, I think from the conversations that Mike has had with several of the yacht club people, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, they've been thinking like just cleaning up issues, but they haven't been thinking very broadly about what do we really need to do here? And so I think that's one of the things that,
But actually,
Yeah, they have. I mean,
they have
until recently, they really haven't.
they-
And they wanted to they wanted the town to help them with their parking lot a few years ago, which was $150,000. And we got into a whole big
Yeah.
argument about whether town resources should go into that. And one of the big asks was if they could just take down their sign that said members and guests only. They haven't wanted to do that yet. So if there are public resources that are going to go into that, I would support it, but it needs to be public, it needs to feel a little more public. In my single one person opinion.
well, I think no matter which way the money came in, either through their 501(c) or through the town, surely it could be figured out who's gonna,
But it sounds like Jeremy's already, I just
No,
know
I
there's all
didn't
this stuff that we want Jeremy to do
right.
and
Okay, let me take a look at
it's like
that.
everybody wants a
and-
piece of Jeremy and it's
Yeah,
death by
well,
a
that's
thousand
what I'm
cuts.
saying. Maybe some of the administrative work could be switched to the yacht club, even though the grant money came through the town.
Mhm.
Well, I'll validate their 501c3 status, and if they are, they can go after the grant.
I know the
I
sailing
believe.
program is at least.
And this is just a draft too, could
Yeah.
always change the governing
Yep.
entity.
But I think
I
not
don't know.
going,
I'm just throwing it out there.
And maybe what I'm saying is 100% wrong and not the right approach, but I just,
I think it'd be a shame though to not pursue this money to at least
Yeah.
get this pre-development
Yeah.
assessment done. And it does fall kind of under our auspices to,
That's kind of how I was looking at it. It's a historic resource that is going to be destroyed. I don't think there's any question about it. If something doesn't happen, we've had 4 storms now, and or 4 or 5 since December 22. And they're hitting the building. All it needs is another foot of water hitting the building.
You've seen that.
Could be.
I've absolutely seen that, but if we want to get into weighing in on what the yacht club is doing, then there are a lot of other things that I think we could weigh in on
Yeah.
as well. And all of a sudden, when there's a lot of money needed, it becomes this public property. And, we're applying for FEMA money and they're repairing the seawall and all of this stuff. And if it's a public property and the town's responsibility, then it's a public property and it needs just the parking. I mean, Mary Louise Curtis Bach would be turning over in her grave about the parking that they've created in the green space there. So we haven't gotten into that level of micromanagement of them. And I doubt they want that. But I know when anything yacht club related comes up on the select board agenda, I get messages from people saying, what the heck? Like, I can't even go down there. And I know some people on the yacht club, that's not what everybody feels there. It's not like everybody in the yacht club is trying to keep people out.
Okay,
But
I think for me, the discussion, I'm
But you're
I'm
not
done. There are a
responsible.
lot of things that need to be discussed. But if we don't take advantage of opportunities, we're going to be losing them, and you'll be losing a lot of people that want to really make this work.
I have an upside comment to make here. We sat in on a Maine preservation talk about how to apply for grants and stuff for FEMA, just out of curiosity. And on that call was the grandson of John Calvin Stevens, and he mentioned the yacht club building. And I just wanted to share that because he lives in Portland or something. And I think he's so interested in this building, and, if any way we can capitulate or get, some publicity about our building through him, that would be nice too. I mean, he called us up after that. We were just on Zoom. We weren't even in the picture. And he called us up afterwards and said, I'm so interested in that building because my grandfather designed it. Anyway, just
Great.
wanted to
Is
pass
he
that on. I didn't even know
A
that
member
was.
though, so I don't know if we can go down there, but
Yeah.
I agree. I think a lot of people would be more interested
Yeah.
in it. And maybe this is an opportunity to make it more of a public resource than it already is.
Yeah. And I know, I don't know enough about what studies and grants are available right now for the entire waterfront. And I know it's a big, big issue. And I see this as really fitting into that. It's just going to save the first $50,000 of rework that's going to be done by doing this pre-engineering work. It doesn't say what's going to happen or who's going to own it or whatever. It's just saying this is a piece of pre-development work that needs to be done. And so,
Well, I think her point is well taken, that it's
Yeah.
like, it's just another piece of work on the planning department's desk.
If there's not, sometimes things have to fall apart enough that the people overseeing it want to look at change. And so that's where I want some indication that more than just people on the outside want to evaluate doing things differently. Because in the past, there has been a lot of interest on the town's part to study change and not as much interest on other entities. And that's a changing reality all the time. But I don't think it works to push change on the yacht club sometimes if they're not ready for it. So
Well,
just the fact that it's Mike that has to apply for the grant and find it and tell them about it and do all the work. And you're not a yacht club member, are you?
I'm sorry.
Are you a yacht club?
No, we're not members.
So
I'm just a
just the
member
more
of
involved
the
they are,
historic
I think that.
interest community.
yeah, I just,
I just want the sign down, really.
yeah, I mean, don't you think there's a lot of interest in town in saving that building?
I don't know. I think there's a lot of resentment in town about the fact that they don't even know that it's a public building, or that people haven't been able to go down there, or that they've been chased away in past years. And I mean, I argue with my father.
I don't.
You might not have had that experience, but a lot of other people have. So I do think there's a perception problem. And that's sort of after the last storm, I got messages from people saying, I don't want to see 1 cent of my tax dollars going toward the yacht club.
Really? Oh my
It's just
gosh.
because of, it's like it's this amazing place that people, but not, I also agree with you that many people want to be able to save it. So
Well,
I think it's an opportunity for improvement.
I didn't realize there was so much resentment out there. I mean, I know I've heard stuff like that, but I haven't heard anybody give a direct.
I think these are like two separate issues though. And
Yeah.
you're 100% right. I meet that as well. I think you're spot on, but its preservation as a historical site is a separate issue from how it's managed and private access and perception. And it seems like you have two things to address.
Yeah, just assessing the amount of public resources that go into it it's been many years since that lease has been renegotiated, things like that. So
Okay.
It needs a big conversation.
workshop, right?
It needs a big,
So it's been a
yeah.
it's been
overhaul.
a long meeting, and maybe we should bring it to close unless somebody else has something else to add. I know I had one.
I
Yes.
just have one, I know we were talking a lot about, I see a lot of similarities between the John Calvin Stevens, yacht club structure as well as the Curtis Island structure, in that they're it's, you know, Mike and Pat have done an incredible job in creating a sense of ownership with this foundation, with the Curtis Island, as the yacht club has done, you know, the private yacht club, or not private, but the organization
That's the faux pas. Yeah, go on.
has done a great job in kind of creating a sense of ownership. But I come back to that this, in my understanding, is the legal responsibility of the town to care for both of those structures. And so I think that that should not be, and maybe I'm misinterpreting the lease of the yacht club, but as I understand it, the town is responsible to maintain that structure and the function as a yacht club.
Yeah.
Which will only be, now I'm under the impression, should there be some level of retreat, you know, that gets into another environmental topic, but as it currently exists, I see this as a really much a legal conversation of who owns the responsibility. And in the interest of the town, I think that there needs to be a sense of ownership that the town takes over the rehabilitation or preservation of both of these structures.
Yeah, I think that's my understanding too.
Legally,
Yeah.
the last time this came up, it was about the parking lot and whether the town should be paying for their parking lot. Now, the lease does not say that we're responsible for all of that stuff. But what was discovered is that unlike every other long-term agreement that we have, this one never went to voters. And the select board doesn't have the power to commit future select boards to anything. And what the agreement at the time was between the yacht club board and the select board at the time was that either they set a rate and the rate of increase, so it was $20,000 plus whatever each year, and that the yacht club was going to be responsible for taking care of the building and all of that. I believe it's on the town insurance. But it also said that either party to end the agreement has to give 20 years notice.
20.
And we were like, oh my gosh. But then it was discovered that it never went to town meeting vote. So voters never got to approve that. And so if we want to really get into it, some people would say that residents were sort of robbed of their opportunity to negotiate the terms. Yes, the deed says that it's going to be used for yacht club and community purposes. It doesn't say a private yacht club. It doesn't say the Camden Yacht Club. So there is room for a much larger conversation there. But in the past, the yacht club didn't want to have that conversation because it's a big conversation, and you know, who has time for that? So,
Yeah.
so legally, it's actually on really fuzzy ground, and I think there's a reason why some people are a little ticked off about it.
Well, it may be an opportunity to make some change. It's a negotiating.
Right? Oh yeah, there's definitely a lot of negotiating ability there.
Yeah, I just feel like if the town is going to be, and I include myself in this as a resident of the town, is going to be pointing the finger to Curtis Island Foundation or pointing the finger to the yacht club, we're effectively shooting ourselves in the foot.
Oh, I don't.
So I think this it needs to be, we need to think like the polarization of, especially with the yacht club, just needs to stop. You know, because we lose the entire heart of the vulnerability that the structure is in. And I say equally that with Curtis Island, if we're saying, oh, to the degree that this, you know, the minutia, to the degree, to the use, this is Mike and Pat are dedicating their time as residents of the town on behalf of the town
Let's
to
not.
protect this building.
I mean,
But ultimately, like they don't, if they weren't doing what they're doing, if the Conovers weren't doing, then the town would have a huge, like Curtis Island is the town's life.
Before we go into this, this is really not, the yacht club conversation is a very different conversation than the Curtis Island
It's not
conversation.
different in the fact that they're both structures under distress and need attention.
Yeah, but let's not, the
And
select
both
board has had a
town's
chance to talk.
responsibility.
The select board has a chance to talk about Curtis Island everything that's come to us has been approved with accolades and thanks. And the yacht club, the town just helped the yacht club apply for $60,000 in federal funding for to clean up the seawall stuff. There's a lot of collaboration that's happening. This is just a conversation about if we change, because it takes a lot of time to get into discussions about big changes. And it's just about the bandwidth for each of those things and whether everybody has the bandwidth for a big conversation right now on many fronts. But I think there's actually a lot of good collaboration going on.
I think you're misinterpreting. I wasn't
Okay.
suggesting that there's not collaboration happening. I'm putting an emphasis on that this is the town's responsibility, not the yacht clubs, not Curtis Island Foundation.
Okay, but the lease just doesn't allow us to do some of that stuff. But it's a great
yeah.
conversation to have.
Yeah, there's obviously a lot of issues
Yeah,
to
and it's
discuss.
shared
It's like the library kind of too.
It's a shared responsibility, or it
Right.
has been in both cases, and it just needs to be straightened out.
And
Do
just
it well.
as a closing thought, just on, as the Historical Resources Committee, it's part of our charter to protect and make recommendations.
Absolutely.
And so just from our purview, our small little slice of this conversation, I think what Michael is doing is essential. We need to find out what needs to be done, what our options are to preserve an asset that we're supposed to be preserving. So,
And you guys, that's exactly right. Weighing in on that and what the town or the yacht club should be doing. And I think
yeah.
it's great to have that conversation, which is
Great.
why I really want Mike to be an official member of the Historic Resources Committee.
Are we good?
Thank you so much, Chris. You're doing a great job.
Yeah, I just had to ask one little tiny question, something you said.
Uh-oh.
Not about this, but you said in passing about the historical preservation ordinance, because I think that will inform our efforts on that. I don't want to backtrack, but you did say that you have been told
In the past.
because Jeremy himself told us that he does have the bandwidth and to administer the historical preservation ordinance, and it was against his recommendation that we add a historical preservation officer.
Well,
that-
sometimes those officers can actually turn into more, like when you hire a part-time staff person to do something, they turn into a lot of work too. That was I've been doing this for a
Okay,
while,
okay.
and I have wanted much more robust demolition and preservation ordinances.
Okay.
And it's been a painful process,
Okay.
and
I just wanted to make sure there wasn't something we didn't know.
so many times, like my idea of what we can accomplish is not realistic for some of the other people that we work with. So
Okay,
no, it's not. I've not been scolded recently for.
okay, great,
But
awesome. I
you
know
know,
there.
there's always a select board.
Sure. All right. Thanks, everyone. Motion to end the meeting? Okay, second? Yeah, okay, great. Thanks, everyone. We got a lot done. All right.
Gosh, we covered everything.
Yeah, that was really important to have you here. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
No, that's great.
Chris, just for a second.
Okay, I'm
Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, Tom?
So I brought you a little present.
Oh,
Does that look familiar? That great Spruce Head Island dock.
it does.
That's Fairfield Quarter.
Oh, really?
And I was throwing out some old cards the other day, and I said, I'm gonna save that and take that to the meeting.
Oh.
So